Hello, good morning, everyone. We hope you're doing good this week while you're enjoying the Microsoft Inspire event. We have our first bootcamp with Nerdio. So here today, this morning, we have Pete Langas from Nerdio, Christopher Jones from Nerdio as well, Marcela Rovira from marketing at Intcomex, and Tino Vergara, our pre-sales engineer from Intcomex. I am Marlene Novo. I'm in charge of the deployment and development of Nerdio in Latin America and the Caribbean from Intcomex. So today we are going to know a little bit more about Nerdio. Nerdio's mission is to empower MSPs and partners to build successful cloud practices in Microsoft Azure. So today will be the first bootcamp, as I mentioned, and we will have the commercial session today. Welcome Pete Langas from Nerdio to give us a little bit more understanding about the commercial offering from Nerdio.
Thanks, Marlene, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for letting me speak today. Nice to meet everyone virtually. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about Nerdio. I'd like to tell you about our company, about our product, and then give you a short demo of what the product looks like. Again, my name's Pete Langas. I'm in charge of our strategic partnerships and our distribution partners, specifically, and our international business. So I wear a lot of hats here. I do a couple other things too, but Nerdio's a young, small company, and we all do a lot of different things, and we move very fast. And we've positioned ourselves with Microsoft and our partners like Intcomex to try to help partners build their Azure practices. Here's my contact info. If you ever need to get hold of me, feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll get right back to you. Let me start by talking a little bit about Nerdio. We are headquartered outside of Chicago. We're in the Chicago suburbs. We have very deep roots in virtual desktops and the managed service provider, the MSP market. And we have hundreds of customers representing thousands of virtual desktop users. So I would say, one of our specialties is really the whole virtual desktop environment, and our founder and some of the others in the company have been working with virtual desktops for the better part of 15 years. So a lot of deep expertise there. Let me walk you through how everything came together for Nerdio and how we got to where we are today. As I mentioned, our founder's been involved in virtual desktops for a long time. He actually started a managed service provider back in 2005. And the idea that he had was that he could see that things were starting to move online. So he started a next generation MSP to do online backup. So that's really how he started. We did some cloud backup. Of course, back then it wasn't called cloud. But eventually that turned into more than just backup. It turned into providing virtual servers and virtual desktops for the small and medium-sized business base that he was pursuing. So that original company functioned as really a next generation MSP, and they provided a virtual infrastructure of servers and desktops and storage to their clients, and then they wrapped what you folks all do, kind of traditional MSP services around it, so help desk and strategy and whatever other products they needed. And that company grew very well. It took some outside money, and the challenge they started having was that they were trying to grow the company. It was becoming hard to scale because every time they did a deployment, it looked a little bit different and it was very people intensive. And so that's when the idea of Nerdio was born. We actually wrote some software to help that MSP really standardize offerings that would make it easier to sell, easier to deploy, and then easier to manage. So Nerdio was actually built as a tool for this first MSP. And after we had done that, we looked at it, and it really gave us, a lot of help. It really helped us accelerate our practice, get more sales, onboard customers faster, service them faster. And so we looked at that and thought, wow, if this is good for our MSP, maybe there's other MSPs who would like it too. So we created an offering called the Nerdio Private Cloud. We started talking to some other MSPs, and what we heard was, wow, this is a great idea. This is really cool that you guys have built software to help sell and deploy a private cloud, but we don't want to be in the private cloud. We want to be in Microsoft Azure. If you guys could take what you've done and develop the same kind of thing from Microsoft Azure, then you'd really have something. So 3 years ago, Nerdio for Azure was born. And I remember it was 3 years ago because we launched at Microsoft Inspire in Washington, D.C. 3 years ago. And I remember talking to people and trying to explain what we were doing. And a lot of people were kind of shaking their heads and couldn't get their arms around it because, at the time, and I'll cover this a little later, Azure was just starting to make some headway, I think, with MSPs. They knew they wanted to get in it, but they were struggling with it. So we knew then that we had something that was going to, I think, be very valuable in the future. Probably didn't realize at the time just how valuable what we created was going to be, but we could kind of feel the excitement around it even, 3 years ago. Since then, we've continued to enhance Nerdio. We've added features. We've developed a couple different license models with it, and it's had tremendous success in the channel, not only in the US, but around the world. And we're super excited to be working with Intcomex to be able to really address the Latin American market. That's something we haven't been able to do up to this point. So really excited about this partnership and glad that I can speak to everybody today. We are a Microsoft partner. We are Microsoft co-sell ready. So as you can imagine, we're very tightly aligned with Microsoft. I apologize for spending a lot of time on this slide, but I always like to let people know that we created Nerdio from the perspective of a partner, from the perspective of being an MSP. It wasn't created in a vacuum by some huge company. It was created by a small company that understands what partners go through on a day-to-day basis, and we know how you run your business and some of the challenges you face, and we know the financial models behind it. So like everything that you folks go through, and as you build your business and grow your business, like we've been there, and we tried to design this to help you to continue to build your practice in Azure and launch that practice in Azure if you haven't done so far. Just some of the awards we've had over the years. So if you know anything about Nerdio, you've probably seen us on social media. We have a pretty large presence. We like to position ourselves as not only thought leaders, but a true partner in the community and the ecosystem, trying to advance not just Nerdio, but bring our partners up with us and certainly get the message of Microsoft Azure out there as well. So along the way, we've picked up some awards. Up until March of this year, we were very active in different trade shows and user groups and so forth. That, unfortunately, with the rest of the world has been kind of shut down. We're hoping that'll pick up again here towards the end of the year. Let's cross our fingers. But we're very active in the community, and we believe very strongly in being part of that community and helping our partners and the whole ecosystem. Okay, I always like to start my presentation by just kind of a refresher on why the cloud. I mean, I think the pandemic has shown everyone the power of being able to run workloads in the cloud. But if you go back even before the pandemic, we still run into folks that are still questioning, why the cloud? And this isn't necessarily partners or end users, sometimes it's both, but we still get quite a bit of this questioning, why someone should go to the cloud. And there's really, I think, three big ones. The first one is the performance that you get with it. So, security, flexibility, the scalability, the elasticity of it, the ability to shrink and expand workloads depending on what's going on. We've seen an awful lot of this over the last few months as organizations had to scramble to get their workers at home, where before maybe they weren't set up for that. And now as things have gotten a little bit better, they're able to bring some workers, at least in some spots of the US, back to their office and shrink the resources back down. So, if you think about having to do that with a traditional hardware model, it would have been very expensive. And in some cases, you couldn't even get the hardware. So the ability of the cloud to shrink and expand and really match up in size with what's going on with whatever the users happen to be doing and whatever the business case is very powerful. The ease of management with the cloud. So again, being able to deploy additional storage at the touch of a button instead of going in and physically installing drives is again, hugely powerful. And then lastly, the reliability. And up until a few years ago, everyone said, I'm not going to go in the public cloud. It's not reliable. It's not secure. What you find now is that that's completely gone away. People have no hesitation to be in the public cloud. And it makes sense, right? Because if you think about it, Azure, the premier public cloud, the one we're all aligned with, that's being run by a multi-trillion-dollar company, namely Microsoft, right? And if you don't think that they have the best of the best, both in terms of hardware, data networking, security, and the biggest asset of it all, their people, like if you can't get your arms around that that is as good as it gets, then you're really, really missing something. So performance, reliability, ease of management, these are all the things why we really want to be in the cloud, and we want our customers in the cloud. And the quick stat over there, one of them is a little bit outdated, but clearly the priority is to get people into the cloud. And with the pandemic, that has only gotten stronger and stronger. So if we all agree on that, if we all agree that the cloud is where it's at, both for customers and partners, then what is stopping partners from moving their customers to the cloud? I mean, we've even seen cases where customers are screaming to get to the cloud and the partners don't know how to get them there. So if the cloud's so great, and if customers want to get to the cloud and it's high on the list of their initiatives, why aren't partners moving as fast as they can to get their customers into the cloud? And it really boils down to what we at Nerdio call MSP inertia. Essentially, partners are very used to running their businesses the way that they are, and the thinking that they have to change everything and everything that goes along with that is very daunting sometimes. And speaking from experience, we went through the same thing with our MSP, so we totally get it. We have a lot of customers still running on our private cloud, and we have hesitated to move them maybe to a public cloud because we're kind of used to running them there. So similarly, if you are used to running customers on-prem and you have a business model based around that, the thinking to change and move them to the cloud can sometimes be a big roadblock, right? And we think it really boils down to the challenges that some MSPs face in doing that, namely that the perceptions that Azure is going to be too expensive, it's going to be too complex, and it's going to be too risky. So we hear this whether I'm talking to a one-person MSP in Idaho in the US or a large MSP in the UK or in Latin America. We're hearing the same kind of things, that inertia is caused by the perception that Azure is too expensive, that it's going to be too complex, and it's too risky. So let's dive into these a little bit. On the expense side, what we hear is that Azure is going to be too expensive. If I take a workload and I try to run a 24/7 in Azure, it's just going to blow the cost out of the water compared to doing something on-prem. There's also the idea that it's going to be very expensive to hire engineers that have Azure training and Azure expertise in order to onboard and manage those customers in Azure. So Azure is going to be expensive. The second thing we hear is that Azure is going to be too complex for me. So if you look at Azure and all the different services that it encompasses, there's literally hundreds of services, different things you can do in Azure, IoT, infrastructure, AI. You kind of look at that and say, where do I even start? So when you start looking at all the different services and trying to figure out how you might fit them together, that can again seem way too complex. And then there's the whole idea of risk. So if I'm going to take my business model and shift it from on-prem to a cloud-based model, what does that look like? How do I go from what's essentially been fixed pricing, where I buy something at X and sell it at something more than X and collect that money, that margin? How do I go to a model that's more consumption-based, where I don't know exactly what my bill is going to be every month, and how do I price that? And how do I go hire the right people, and how do I pay them, and how do I keep them up to speed and train them and retain them in what has traditionally been a very competitive job market? So there's this element of risk that comes in to the equation as well. So the expense, the risk, and the complexity are the three things we hear. And this is really why we created Azure, or why we created Nerdio. The idea was to address those three pain points. And we do that by what we did is we made investments in 4 different areas when we created Nerdio for Azure. And again, we did this from the perspective of someone who had been an MSP, who knew what that business model looked like and what some of the challenges might be. And so essentially, we've created a tool that gives you the ability to price, deploy, manage, and optimize different workloads in Azure and take away that complexity, take away that risk, and make sure that there's going to be margin there for you, but also that it's going to be attractively priced for customers so that they're not looking at it and thinking that it's way too expensive to ever afford. Let me dive into these a little bit. One of the things we recognized is that as much as we could help with deployment and management and optimization of Azure workloads, if we couldn't help MSPs price things out effectively, it was never even going to get to the deployment stage. So we've taken a lot of time to work on what we call the Nerdio cost estimator. And this is a tool, and I'm going to show you this in a little bit, but it essentially helps you model out what different workloads will look like in Azure so that you know what the cost is, and then you can add your margin on top, make sure that you're making enough money and that the customer is satisfied with the price. A couple points. One thing we decided early on when we created our tool was that while we could have made it extremely flexible, knowing that most MSPs didn't have a lot of experience in Azure, we felt that we needed to make the tool a little more rigid. And so one of the things we did was we designed on 3 different architectures that you could deploy. So we have something called Nerdio Core, which is for doing IaaS type deployments. And then we created Nerdio Professional and Nerdio Enterprise, which would be more inclusive when you were doing virtual desktops. So essentially, you price and deploy one of those 3 scenarios, either Nerdio Core, Nerdio Professional, or Nerdio Enterprise, depending on whether you're doing an IaaS deployment or a virtual desktop deployment. The key in doing those, it makes it not only easy to deploy, but it makes it easy to price those out. By having those very standardized architectures, you'll see with the tool how easy it is to price these out. But that was kind of one of our basic tenets, was that we're going to need to have very standardized offerings to make it easy to price, which makes it easy to sell. So pricing was that first pain point we addressed. The second one is deployment. So we make deployment super easy. When you're ready to deploy a Nerdio customer, you're going to go to Intcomex, you're going to get an Azure subscription, you're going to fire up Nerdio for Azure, you are going to pick what deployment model you want, either Enterprise, Professional, or Core. You're going to link to the Azure subscription, you're going to press a button, and in about 2 to 5 hours, depends on the type of architecture you're doing and what's going on with the Azure environment that day, but somewhere in 2 to 5 hours, you are going to have a perfectly crafted architecture. You're going to have this environment ready to go and ready to service your customers, or ready for you at least to start layering on their data and get them ready to go. When you think about the pandemic and how fast people were scrambling to try to get their customers up and running, you can imagine this came in very handy to be able to deploy people very quickly. Besides being able to deploy them very quickly, because as I mentioned, we've built these standardized architectures, every time we do a deployment, it looks the same. So the same networking is put in place, the same server is set up. You can certainly go in there and change things after the fact, but we go in and we turn the dials and press the buttons in Azure to set up this perfect standardized environment for you every single time very quickly. So if you think about having to do that manually, having engineers do that and people do that, nothing wrong with that, and nothing that you still can't go in and tweak. But the ability to have a machine do these things means it's going to be very accurate and very standardized. And that's how you scale a business. That's how you build a business and then grow it, by having standardized processes. Once everything's been deployed, we give you the ability to go in and manage your customer and all the rest of your customers. So we give you a single pane of glass where you can go in, look at all your different accounts and do management tasks, whether that's adding a user, changing a user, adding a server, changing the specs on a server, maybe you need to add some more storage, things like that. Again, it's point and click. You can do most tasks with 3 clicks or less, and you can do them all very quickly in minutes instead of hours, and a lot of it is machine driven. So this hopefully crystallizes it for you, but we've made it easy enough for a salesperson, so someone like me, to go in and actually add users in the Azure environment. Now that should frighten you, certainly, because you really don't want salespeople doing that, but it should also hopefully make you feel good about how easy we've made it to do these tasks. What it means for you is that you can throw a lower level resource at a lot of your management tasks. So you don't have to have a high-end Azure certified engineer to do a lot of these tasks. You can have more of a help desk type person that can take care of these tasks very quickly and easily, and have full confidence that they're going to be done right, because it's the machines doing most of the work. Lastly, we help you optimize the environment. We do this for two dimensions, really: performance standpoint and a cost standpoint. So we're going to make sure that you've built an environment that lines up the right performance with whatever demands are being placed on it. And then we're also going to help you automate the environment so resources are not being used, are not being charged when they're not being used. We do this in two ways. One is we have some technology we've built called auto scaling. That gives you the ability to let the environment shrink and expand based on different thresholds. It could be CPU usage, it could be some time of day scheduling. We also help you model out what are called reserved instances, and these are ways where you can commit to a certain period of time to buy your Azure consumption, and by doing that, you get a huge price break on it. So we help you model that all out through our cost estimator. Again, something I'll show you in a couple minutes here. But essentially, we give you the tools to be able to price, deploy, manage, and optimize these different workloads, these different licenses and architectures in Azure. And hopefully that's how you start to build that business and grow it. In terms of how everything fits together, middle circle is going to be your Azure resources in Office 365 or M365. So these are all the things that you're going to get from Intcomex. You're going to get your Azure subscription, your licensing that's required for Office and for Windows 10 Enterprise. So Intcomex is really your partner there in the middle. On the outside are going to be all the things you do as partners. So migration services, IT strategy, help desk support. In the middle, the blue circle is Nerdio. So we're really that bridge between Azure and you. We're giving you the ability to do the things that I talked about: the pricing, the deployment, the management, the optimization. We're that glue that kind of holds everything together. Talking through the different plans, we have Nerdio Core, which again is kind of, think of it as where you start sometimes with a customer. So if they're ready to maybe just move a server into Azure, this would be a good tool for that. And with that, we charge, and I'm just giving you US list prices. Intcomex can certainly tell you what your prices look like in the appropriate currencies and so forth. But essentially, we charge per customer account per month. And it doesn't matter whether you have 1 VM or 2,000 VMs. If you're not doing any desktops, that's kind of a standard charge, $59 for that whole account. So a really good way to get in there and get your feet wet with moving customers into Azure with a simple workload. We also have Nerdio Professional and Nerdio Enterprise. These are both licenses that you would use when you're deploying a virtual desktop, Windows Virtual Desktop WVD. That's of course gotten very big here in the last few months. You are going to find that you rarely, if ever, use Professional. There's even been talk internally that we may sunset that product because there hasn't been a lot of use with it. Most people find that they're using Nerdio Enterprise if they're going to do WVD deployments. So that's the one you're going to want to focus on there. For that, we charge $12 US per desktop per month, and we charge on actual consumption. So if you had an organization that had maybe 20 users in March, their bill would be for 20 users. In April, maybe because the pandemic fired up, they needed to add another 30 users. Their bill would have jumped up for 50 desktop users. And let's say that continued through August, but in August they were able to go back down to 20. Then that August bill would be 20. So we actually, your bills are going to be based on actual consumption. So that's really nice because it aligns very well with Azure. It aligns very well with 365, and it lets the customer really pay only for what they're using. So it's a different way of looking things than we have probably structured things in the past, but it's really the way the world is moving. So those are the plans. Kind of in summary, how we help. it's really about less risk. So we can help you with the pricing and the optimization, the automation. It's about less work because we give you a lot of operating leverage. So we make it really easy to deploy in management and again, have that lower level resource. And then it's about a bigger reward. You should have easier sales, you should have better margins, and hopefully what you're going to see is increased revenue per user because you're not just going to be selling them hopefully a desktop. Hopefully you're going to layer on antivirus and Office 365 backup and other ancillary services that'll let you go out there and really be able to sell a very high revenue, high value type proposition to your customers. So let's talk a little bit about, really creating opportunity and how do you use Nerdio for Azure to identify opportunities and then go sell them. I've highlighted in green probably the 3 biggest ones that we see. So the first one in terms of selling is if you hear the word hardware refresh or of a hardware refresh, so you have that server that's coming, that's out of date, that's on its last legs. I mean, that is obviously a great time to move a customer into the cloud. Good time to move them into Azure. And Nerdio Core would be the product that you'd want to use to help with that. So essentially, you will take that maybe it's a web server, maybe it's a QuickBooks server, but you'll take that and you'll use Nerdio to help you build what that would look like in Azure. The second one, and if I had made this slide today instead of 3 or 4 months ago, I probably would have moved this one to the top, but any kind of virtual desktop initiative, Nerdio is the de facto tool for deploying WVD in Azure. You're not going to find anything else that makes it as easy to price, deploy, and manage those WVD environments in Azure. So if you hear any customer that's looking at virtual desktops, looking to set up a remote workforce, and we have some nice promotions around this too, but anyone who's trying to do WVD and set up those remote workers, you're going to want to use Nerdio to help you do that. The other one, this was a big talk last year at Inspire, and I think it still holds true. Windows Server 2008 is end of life. I know there's still really millions of them out there, but that's, again, a good opportunity, kind of relates to that hardware refresh to move your customers into the cloud. Some other ones that come up, a customer that's involved in mergers and acquisitions, a good time to look at a cloud strategy to kind of take all those different locations and those different companies and put them on a common platform. Moving locations, that's a good time where, again, people tend to look at doing a refresh. A lot of these end up being related to refresh, I guess. You see some other ones there. The one that also comes up is that smaller or no IT staff, and this is where you guys play, but it really makes sense if someone's trying to eliminate their staff or they have a staff that is too busy focused on more line of business applications. So really, they have an IT person but they're really trying to do more strategic things. Good opportunity for the MSP partner to come in and take over that infrastructure and place it in Azure. So again, some good ideas here on where to look for opportunity to use Nerdio for Azure and get your clients into the cloud. Let me talk specifically about WVD because this usually comes up and there's some huge benefits there. And again, the pandemic has brought this to the forefront. I'll run through a few of these kind of quickly, but the first two kind of go together, this whole idea of bring your own device. So quick story, what we saw a lot of situations happening where you had customers that wanted to send their workers home and their remote work strategy was VPN. And the problem that came into focus very quickly was that if they had been sending their customers home, their employees home with company issued laptops, they very quickly found that if they needed more of them, there weren't enough to go around. Like it seemed the whole world was out of laptops. And so for clients that use WVD, all they needed was some kind of device that they could run the WVD client on. So it could be on a phone, it could be a Surface tablet, it could be an old device. I actually run our WVD on about a 6-year-old MacBook. It's not even a Windows device. So the ability to run a remote worker on their own device was very, very powerful for that kind of disaster recovery situation, right? The ability to onboard and offboard employees immediately. Again, going back to the pandemic, we had situations where companies were able to get hundreds of users fired up almost overnight and be productive. Whereas if you tried to do that in a traditional non-cloud, non-virtual desktop model, I mean, there's no way. You'd be talking days, weeks, months to get that all set up. So, it's the ability to get people set up very quickly and very easily that makes WVD so powerful. I've seen something very interesting over the last, I would say, 3 or 4 weeks. When the pandemic hit, there was a mad scramble for everyone to get WVD fired up. What we've seen in the last few weeks is people now are starting to pause projects a little bit because there's this feeling that maybe the pandemic is slowing down and life is going to return back to some percentage of normal sooner rather than later. I think the messaging from us as Microsoft partners has to be, excuse my phone, that may be all very true, that things are getting back to normal, but what's to say that another pandemic isn't going to hit or another disaster isn't going to hit? And we need to remind them how bad things were and how critical it is to have something like WVD in place for when the next disaster hits. The great thing about WVD is you can even set it up as something that is just ready to go and not consuming many resources at all, but have it ready and even put it out there as kind of a DR type strategy and be able to spin up very quickly, in a matter of hours, should the customer need it. So there's a lot of reasons to start thinking about WVD and building it into your practice and having it as a solution ready for your customers, whether it's today to handle remote workforces or whether it's just something on standby to be able to do that should the need arise. Okay, let me jump now into a demo, and what I'm going to do is spend maybe 10-15 minutes walking you through what Nerdio for Azure looks like, and after that we'll leave some time for Q&A. So let me jump out of here, and I'm going to go ahead and log in. So process-wise, when you sign up for Nerdio for Azure through Intcomex, you're essentially getting a $0 SKU. You're getting a registration SKU, and you'll get login information into Nerdio for Azure. So you as an organization will have this login where you go in, and once you have it, you now have access to the Nerdio platform. So you can see here, I have, this is a kind of our dummy account, but I have 5 different accounts in my fake MSP. So here's my different customers, and you can see the various status of each of them. And we've gone through at some point, we onboarded these 5 customers. When I'm ready to quote a customer, so let me kind of take you through the life cycle of this. When I'm ready to quote a customer, I'll come here and I will go into the Nerdio, the NFA cost estimator. So this is really where it all starts. And I think I mentioned at kind of the start of this, if you can't present a price and a quote to the customer that makes sense, like forget about deploying their account and managing their account, because it really all starts with selling, right? So this is how we would go in and actually build a quote for the customer. The first thing I'm going to do is you're going to select the use case. So if you remember, I talked about Nerdio Core, Nerdio Professional, and Nerdio Enterprise. Let's say that we're trying to quote out a customer that's going to be 40 virtual desktops, and so we're going to use the Enterprise license. So that's what I've selected here. First thing you're going to do is you're going to go in and populate how many users. So here we're going to say 40 users. And we can actually offer WVD or RDS. Almost everything you're going to see is going to be WVD. Occasionally, you will run into someone who's running a very old application that's going to require RDS, but I wouldn't even worry too much about that because that's really an outlier type case. Most of the time, you're going to select Windows Virtual Desktop right here. Then we're going to ask you a couple of questions on the type of desktops. Now, we have the ability to set up what's called a dedicated desktop or a personal desktop or what's called a pooled desktop. A dedicated desktop is going to be true one-to-one relationship, resources to user. It's the ultimate in kind of security, performance, and privacy. You are rarely going to deploy that for a whole organization. You may deploy it for a couple of users who are either security sensitive or very performance sensitive, but most of the time you're going to use what's called a pooled desktop. A pooled desktop takes a VM and shares the resources among a pool of users. If you think about it, when you're running a computer, you know, you're not actually running the CPU all the time, so there's a lot of downtime there. And so by pooling those resources, you can take that CPU and share it, that usage and that power, and share it among different users, and you get great economies of scale by doing that and a lower cost. So pooled users are going to be significantly lower than personal desktops or dedicated users. But in this case, just to illustrate what the difference looks like, let's go ahead and say that there's 2 dedicated users that we needed. So we'll put those in there, and then we'll say the rest of them are going to be pooled. As an aside, we also have the ability to support what are called GPU users. So these are users that need access to graphics processing, so a CAD user or someone who's doing a lot of design work. I'm going to leave that out of the equation for today, but just kind of know that those are there. They are subject to Azure resources, so depending on different regions, sometimes they're not available in an Azure data center, so you do need to check that. But for today, we're just going to kind of leave it as 2 dedicated users and 38 pooled users. I can actually go in and set the users to CPU core ratio. I like to set it at 3. So what this is essentially saying is that for each CPU in that shared VM, I'm going to allocate a max of 3 users to it. I could change this to 4 or 6 or make some other allocations as you see here. Today we'll go ahead and use 3. The next thing I'm going to do is look at the servers. So by default, Nerdio is always going to deploy a domain controller and a file server. We don't want you to, you actually can't take these out, but we don't want you to, if you can, change the instances so much. These are kind of like best practices recommendations, but if you wanted to, you certainly could. We'll go ahead and say also that this client had a application server that they needed. So we'll call that app server, and then I'm going to go ahead and go with that CPU, but I'm going to say that because it's an app server, I need to put some disk space there. So we'll go ahead and throw in a 256 meg, sorry, I'm really dating myself there, a 256 gig data disk there for whatever data they had. So we're going to have that. So now I have my servers built. And then the last thing I'm going to do is look at licensing options. So in order to support virtual desktops, there's a couple things we need. We need Office 365. We don't actually need those, but we're going to tie into that. And then we also need Windows 10 licenses. If you're using M365, that'll include both. So if you wanted to, you could build these into the quote. Let's just say in this case that the customer already had M365, so they didn't need any additional licensing. But just know that it is there if you wanted to rope that in. And then we're going to look at other features. Let's go ahead and say that we wanted to activate in-region backup. Let's also say that we wanted to activate what's called hybrid AD. So if you think about it, when you fire up a new customer, there's a good chance that at least for some period of time, we're going to need to talk between the on-prem location and the Azure environment, whether it's just to move some data over or to get access to an application or just to have that hybrid environment running for a little while. You're probably going to need it. So let's go ahead and build that into the quote. Again, you don't have to have it, but you'll see that when I did that, it automatically establish the pricing for the VPN that we would need as well. All right, we have those things built in now to our quote. These are standard cost assumptions we make, so we go ahead and say that the bandwidth is going to be about $1.50 US per month. We're going to say storage usually costs about 3 cents per gig. The personal desktops, that's the default size we're going to use there. And you can see here I've made no allocations for any kind of additional discounting. This is where you would work with Intcomex to see, if you can take advantage of any further discounts there. So this is kind of like a, worst case scenario quote. Once I'm done, I'm going to hit View Costs. And you can see here that based on everything we've built out, that cost is going to wind up being $42 per user per month. Now, if you hear nothing else during my presentation, hear this. This is your cost as a partner. This is not the customer cost. So on top of this, you're going to want to add in whatever margin that you're going to place there. We typically see our partners, and this is kind of, a little bit dependent on region and so forth, but we see partners getting 40 to 60% margins when they go to market. So, in that case, something like this might cost, end user pricing might be something like, $70 per month. I've seen customers, partners in the US price out workloads higher than $200 per user per month, and they do that by bundling in different services. They bundle in help desk, IT strategy, telephony, internet. The list is endless of different things you can bundle in to add even more value. But one more data point for you: in our legacy MSP business, our average per user per month price, all in with servers, desktops, everything else, Office 365 is about $175 per user per month. So this can be a very high revenue, high margin type item. Again, very dependent on the customer situation and where you are in the world, of course, but there is potential here for great margin, great value for your customer. Good little breakdown here on where the cost is coming from. So you can see that almost $1,200 of it is from Azure, and $480 of it is from the Nerdio. If you look down here, you can see that with the 40 desktops, 38 of them are pooled, 2 are personal, and here's the actual VMs that are created. So there's the domain controller and the file server that are standard. Here's the VM that we're using for that hybrid AD domain controller. Here's the app server I built. There's a VM for the 2 personal desktops. I'm sorry, 1 for each. And then there's also 4 VMs we're going to use to handle all those pooled users. So essentially, we're using about a VM for the 30 if you do quick math, for about 10 pooled users on each one. Here's actually how the Azure costs break down. So you can see here's the server compute, the storage, backup. Those are kind of low. The storage and the backup are kind of low pieces here. What's interesting and what I'd like to show you is for those dedicated desktop users, that's costing $136 per month. So that's about almost $70 per user. The pooled desktops are costing a total of $364. So there, it's only about $10 per user. So you can see there's a huge difference between doing pooled desktops and dedicated desktops. Okay, so that's kind of what it would look like. And you can go ahead and print it out and save it as a PDF. Very soon we'll have the ability for you to save your quotes. So that'll be a good feature coming out in one of the next revs. I think it's coming out in the next few weeks here. Let me show you very quickly a couple of the levers you can use. So I talked about reserved instances. This is essentially the ability to commit to 1 year of Azure resources. By doing that, you're going to see now that my $42 went down to $35 per user. So that's a good way to get some additional cost savings. We can also take advantage of what's called the Azure Hybrid Use Benefit. If I do that, you're essentially buying the licensing part, not the compute part, but the licensing part ahead of time. So if I go ahead and do that, you can see I jumped down a couple dollars more. So these are some levers you can do to get your costs down, and then it's up to you whether you want to pass that margin on to the customer, share it with the customer, or pass it all on to the customer, or keep it all for yourself. But certainly different ways to create a quote and estimate your costs. And you should feel pretty good about the cost estimation here. We've been doing this now for 3 years, and I would say we're probably plus or minus 5% on these estimates. So very close to what you'll actually see when your bill comes. So that's building a quote out. Once you've presented to the customer, let's say they accept it and you're ready to go ahead and deploy an account, you would come into this page here. You can see I have 5 existing accounts, but maybe I want to add a new one. I'll hit add NFA account. I will select, let's say we're going off that quote we just did. I'd select NFA Enterprise, and I'm going to do Windows Virtual Desktop. I'm going to hit next. Here I'm going to link to the subscription and resource group that I've gotten from my friends at Intcomex. I'm going to connect to it. Once it's connected, I'll also want to select, the region where I'm going to deploy. So this could be US, it could be South America, it can be anywhere you need it to be. What's available from Microsoft, those will all appear. Once I've done that connection, I'm going to give the customer a name. I'm going to hit save. And once I hit save, that's where the automation software takes over, and in somewhere between 2 and 5 hours, let's cancel that because I don't actually want to do it. Somewhere between 2 and 5 hours, that account would appear here on your accounts page. So once you have it, then you would go in and let's just say that you deployed WinHeart. So this is an 8-user account. You could actually log into that account. And by logging in, I'll get a snapshot view of everything that's going on. So here you can see the plan it's running, the domain that it's set up, the account name, the Azure region where it runs, the number of desktop users I have. And if I needed to go in and do some management tasks, this would give me the shortcuts to be able to do that. So I'll show you just a couple things really quick. Let's say that I wanted to add a user. I would come here, hit the Add User button. I would enter the person's name. I would enter their email address. I could assign them a license if I wanted to. I could assign them a desktop. I could put them in one of those pooled that we built, or give them a personal desktop, or if I'm publishing an app, I could do it that way. I can put them, drop them into different AD groups, and then when I'm done, I would hit save. And again, just as I did when I built the account, machines will go in and build that user. If you think about everything you would have to do to build a desktop user and contrast that with what I just did, you can easily see that we're talking minutes instead of hours, and completely low-level resource doing the work. Here is me, Mr. Sales Guy, actually going in, and as you can see how easy it was, I could build a user. So we've made it literally a couple mouse clicks and a couple keystrokes to be able to do that. So that's kind of adding a user. That's an example of a simple management tasks. I can also do things like reset passwords. I could edit that user. I could replace the user, delete them, archive them. So very, very powerful from a management standpoint there. Let's go back home for a second. You also, one thing, let me mention, we're not doing anything that you can't go in and do yourself in Azure. So if you needed to go into Azure directly, you could actually log in right from the screen here and then go in and do whatever needs to be done in Azure. There are a couple tasks that you do have to do in Azure. Simple example, if you need a backup that's longer than 30 days, that's something you have to go into Azure to do. We can't support that right now in Nerdio, but if you wanted to do the 30-day backup, we can certainly do that. But I would say, 90–95% of the things you would need to do in Azure, you can do right here in Nerdio. I think hopefully that gives you a flavor for what the tool looks like from a management standpoint. We covered pricing. And I think since we're about 10 minutes left, let's go ahead and I'm going to jump out and let's see if we have any questions that we want to tackle.
Yes, Pete, we have some questions. The first one is, What's the difference between Nerdio and Azure tools to configure WVD?
Great question. So one difference is if you go into Azure and deploy natively with WVD, now Microsoft has made it easier in the last month. They've eliminated some of the PowerShell scripting you have to do. So you can actually deploy now WVD easier in Azure natively through Microsoft. But for much of the management tasks and for any kind of image management and auto scaling, you're going to need to run scripts, and you're going to really need to know your way around both WVD and Azure. So what we do at Nerdio is we make that all point and shoot like I've shown you today. Hopefully that answered that one.
Very good.
Yeah.
Another question is, does Nerdio management include M365, Microsoft 365?
We will allow you to do some M365 management. As you saw, like when I went in and showed you the console when I added a user, if you have existing licenses there, you can certainly go in and pick those up and manage the users from there. Pricing wise, it does not include it, if that's what the question was. So M365, you're going to transact that through Intcomex.
Great. Someone is giving us some recommendations or asking if there is some recommendations for users involving telephony and conference. Do you require a special pool for this kind of scenario?
Ooh, good question. Christopher. I'd like to put Christopher Jones on our.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know this is kind of a hot button that has come up a lot with the, especially with the integration of Teams and so forth. So.
Yeah, so yeah, it would be the same exact pool. You just deploy a session desktop pool. Natively right now, the Teams integration is a little bit, it's not as smooth as it probably should be. I think what happened was, beginning of or end of last year when WVD came out, Microsoft saw it as, hey, this is a great offering, but it'll probably get a little bit of, segmented adoption as, early adopters start adopting the offering. But then COVID hit and everybody at the same time decided to jump on the solution. So as a result, we see some of the integrations that we would kind of expect to be there, not natively there yet. However, there are almost, in every case, some workarounds. So in the case of Teams and even with our own internal environment, I can speak for myself. I've taken phone calls, team phone calls in our own internal environment. It usually just includes a little bit of PowerShell and just modifying a few modules on the back end, and you can get it working without an issue. So, no need to deploy any new pools or anything unique there. All it takes is a few PowerShell lines and you should be up and running.
Thank you, Chris. That's great. Another question, it's the same person that asked about the M365, and the question is, if it's one single panel of glass for all organizations tenants?
It is. So that screen that I showed you before with the 5 accounts on it, that is single pane of glass for all customer end user accounts that a partner would have. So it's pretty cool because you can go on that screen and look at all your different accounts and see the status of each, and then go in and do management tasks if you have to. So yep, single pane of glass.
Okay.
So, mechanically, you'll get one Nerdio subscription. So you just subscribe once to Nerdio, you get your login, and then you have access to that platform.
Good. We have more interesting questions from Armando. He said, I know Nerdio is for MSP, but what if our customers want limited access? Can we provide a user profile via Nerdio or stick to M365 or Azure portal?
So there is a use case where the end user customer wants some access to Nerdio. So we have a couple different roles. We have kind of this role-based access. So if there's an end user who wants access to do, the common use case is it's a big organization, and there's an end user who wants the ability to manage maybe users. you could give that admin level access, but they don't have the ability to go in and change servers and add, storage and do things like that. That would be that could mess up a lot of things. So there is kind of a Christopher. Are there 2 levels of access or 3 levels of access that we have?
You can provide an end user or a client user with access and then apply 2 different layers of management on them, if you will. Like I think there's partner or client level admin and then something like a billing admin or tier 1 where they can just have like read only access.
Cool. Typically that we see that though for larger type deployments, where someone has someone on staff that can handle that, or they're scared of losing their job and they want something to do. So that's where we see it sometimes.
Very good. And the last question that we have is if there is any use on Windows 10 32-bit too?
Christopher, you want to answer that one?
Sure, yeah. By default, Nerdio provisions all new images with 64-bit. I believe you can do that, but it would just be something manually on the Azure backend. Just pull in a Microsoft Marketplace image 32-bit and then loading up with that OS.
Okay, very good, and thank you, Christopher, for the answers of the technical questions.
No problem.
Thank you, Pete, for all the good content. Oh, we have another question. Let me see if we can answer that one. Can MSP's customers customize the Nerdio portal with their own logo and banner?
You can, yes. We have full white label capabilities, so we encourage people to do that and create an offering. If I could mention one more thing here, I posted in the chat. Marlene, maybe I don't know if everyone can see that. Maybe you can share that, but you're going to want to check out www.getnerdio.com/academy. This is our educational portal, and there are all kinds of articles there. You'll have the ability to read white papers, videos. If you have nothing to do on Saturday night and you're looking for some cool videos and things to read, that's a good place to start. But we have a lot of different things on how to white label, how to brand, how to create packages. There's a lot of really good information there to help you build your practice.
Cool. Yes, and remember that we have the technical session tomorrow with Christopher. So for more technical information, we will have the 2-hour session tomorrow. So please register if you haven't yet. And thank you, Pete, for all the good content and help our MSP's partner to understand a little bit more about the value proposition from Nerdio.
Of course. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Stay safe. And thank you again for the opportunity to work and partner with you.
Thank you, and see you tomorrow.
Take care.